Today, we're going to discuss a very important topic, especially in the Filipino-Chinese community, the topic of succession planning. Okay, succession planning. Specifically, when we talk about, when I talk about succession planning, the goal is not about tax avoidance. Okay, the goal is not to minimize the cost. Instead, the main goal when we talk about succession planning is to preserve harmony in the workplace. Okay, it's to preserve harmony in the workplace. The game has changed. What's important, blessing. Okay, okay, so today we're going to discuss succession planning. Again, specifically, how do we preserve harmony in the family and in the business? Okay, both in the family and in the business. First, let me begin with a very popular saying, "Fu bu guo san tai, ho bui ge san tai," or in English, wealth does not pass 3 generations. Saying or but actually, this is not something limited to the Chinese culture. This is actually something that is observed worldwide. Okay, so Harvard Business School came up with a study, and the result of the study, okay, was that 70% of wealth transfers fail. Again, 70% of wealth transfers fail. This is not based on Philippine data, not based on China data, not even based on Asian data, but this is actually based on American and European data. 70% of wealth transfers from the first generation to the next generation fail. In other words, only 30% of second generation businesses survive. From the second generation to the third generation, the study showed only 15% survive, half mortality rate. Now, from the third generation to the fourth generation, only 5% of businesses survive. These 5%, these are your Rothschilds, these are your Ayalas, these are your Ortigases. Actually, for the Filipino-Chinese community, lang siya po eh. Botuakin kong si Kaute Sitay as of now. Botuakin kong si Kaute Sitay as of now. SM, tetsun, yako Telitay. Okay? Kokongway Group, Telitay. LP Group, Lushatan Group, tetsun, they're just transferring to the second generation. Lan bo tuakin lan lang e kong siyo. Natutun niya ako Sitay Lequan. And unfortunately, this is reality. This is reality. The study came up with 3 main reasons why wealth transfers fail. Number 1, the next generation is not ready. Okay? And you see this. This is a very common problem. The next generation is not ready. Number 2, there's infighting among family members. Okay? And number 3, no one wants to take over the business. Walang ay, so and so. Okay? These are the 3 main reasons why wealth transfers fail. Okay? So this is the background of our talk today. Now, before I start talking about how to preserve harmony in the family, I want to go over with you some of the laws, okay, on succession in the Philippines. What are our Philippine succession rules? What happens, when we're called back to the Lord? And all of us will have to face that one day, sooner or later. So first of all, estate tax right now is 6%. Okay? 6% of the total estate. This means your property values, your bank deposits, your shares of stock, your bonds. Okay? 6% of the total estate. Now, there is a special law right now. There is an amnesty, tax amnesty, estate tax amnesty for those who have passed away prior to 2022 if you have not yet paid the taxes, the estate tax of 6%, there is an ongoing amnesty until June 14, 2025. If hindi niya pa nagagawa yung estate tax of someone who passed away prior to 2023, you should do it now. Because the penalty is 2% per month compounded. So if someone passed away in 2005 and you haven't paid the tax, it's compounded. So you have to take advantage of the amnesty if you have it. But anyway, again, back to the main point. The government, when we pass away, they get 6% of the total estate. Okay? Now, common question is, attorney, how do we settle an estate in the Philippines? Or what happens when we pass away? You know? How do we transfer the properties, the business to the next generation? Legally. Legally. Okay. We have the concept of judicial and extrajudicial settlement. Okay? Judicial settlement simply means that you go to the courts. That's judicial settlement. Judicial settlement. Again, judicial settlement, you go to the courts, and the courts will divide the estate for your children. That's option one. That's expensive. I will get rich if you all do that. Okay? So don't do that. That's not the goal. Judicial settlement is not the goal. Instead, the goal is option number 2, extrajudicial settlement. Extrajudicial settlement. That's the goal. Because in extrajudicial settlement, we don't need to go to the courts. We don't need to inform the court how much we have. The only important thing is that our children are in good terms with each other. Because what's important with an extrajudicial settlement is that they will sign the extrajudicial settlement of estate. Once they sign the extrajudicial settlement of estate, they pay the estate tax to BIR. The BIR will now issue a certificate authorizing registration, and the properties can now be transferred to them. The important point, though, with extrajudicial settlement is that your kids have to be willing to sign the agreement. And the problem is, that agreement will specify what they get. Okay, so they have to agree, na I'm getting this, Anya is getting this, Shobe is getting this. The problem that I face, or I see, is that many children are not in good terms with each other. So they cannot agree what they get. This, and for me, that is the fault of the parents. Because the parents did not prepare ahead of time. When the parents do not prepare, when they do not leave instruction, the children, everyone, let's be honest, everyone is a little bit greedy. Right? Everyone is a little bit selfish. And when parents don't plan ahead of time, children will fight over the estate, oftentimes. Okay? So, before we go again, let me give some introductory facts. Legitimes. In the Philippines, we have the concept of mandatory inheritance. This means that there is a portion of your estate, okay? So there's a portion of your estate that your children are entitled to automatically. But it's not the entire thing. Sige po, Dinake, lang Philippine po, sige mandatory inheritance. So ilan lonzong ay kina, inuhun. Okay? Inuhun. So nandiyo ka sa sige hun. By the way, inapunbo ka o, higit hun. Sige, legitimate. Napunbo ka o, inadyoy ko, and this is what normally happens. This is what I handle. If the children's legitimates, their mandatory inheritance is not satisfied, they can file a case against their siblings and even against their surviving parents to fulfill their mandatory inheritance. So what are the rules on legitimate? Number 1, half of the estate is equally divided by the legitimate children. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, spouse will get the share of one child. Rule number 3, the remainder will be considered the free portion. Then number 4, I hope this is not applicable here, but illegitimate children will get half the share of a legitimate child. Now, imagine this box before you is your total net estate. Imagine let's just say, so that it's easier to compute, it's 100 million. This is everything, all your assets. Kongsi, tuesan, tue, kopyo. Okay? So, 100 million, everything. Now, what happens when we pass away? First, you divide it by 2. Unless you have a prenup agreement, you divide your entire estate by 2. Why? Because half of it goes to your boss, to the wife. For the men, half of it goes to your boss. Because this is, 50% is conjugal property. Okay? So automatic 50 million goes to your surviving spouse. And statistically, men die first. So oftentimes this goes to the surviving wife. Okay? This is conjugal property. This is not subject to 6% estate tax. Because this is her share in the property. This is not subject to estate tax. This remaining portion, these 4 squares, that is called your net estate. That's your net estate. So, what's our rule number 1? Half the net estate goes to the legitimate children. Diba? So, you divide this by 2. That half, child number 1, child number 2. They each get half because dalawa lang sila. 1 surviving spouse, 2 legitimate kids. Rule number 1, half your net estate goes to the children, to the legitimate children. So, divide it by 2. 12.5 million each. Rule number 2, the surviving spouse gets the share of 1 child. The surviving spouse, aside from the conjugal share, they also inherit from their husbands. They also get 12.5 million. Oh. Now the remainder is called the free portion. What is this free portion? The free portion is the part that you can give away to whoever you want. This free portion can be the subject of a last will and testament. So bopat lang kwan di kuya ke. Ni kan ni ko lao bopat lang kwan nan sige ko the free portion. Okay? Because tisa ay siya ko. Sige to si me kwat yang inheritance. This is mandatory. So, Pastor Bonnie already preempted me on my joke. A lot of children of big companies, no, when I handle their cases, pagdating sa boardroom, they start fighting with each other. Okay? Siya nga, who has control of the business kasi we have to elect a board of directors. They start fighting, they start calculating the shares of stock of the company. And then I suddenly remind the children, wait lang ha. Well, normally it's the Atty or the Atty who thinks that they should be in control of the business. I remind them, wait lang ha. Your mom is still alive. Mom is actually in charge. Legally speaking, the mom is actually in charge because she, in this case, she will get 62.5% of the shares. That's more than majority. Okay, so I see there are some second generation here. Be nice to your mom. Not just to your dad. Huwag siksik lang kay Papa, kay Mami rin. Now, another example. Again, I hope this is not applicable here to our church. But what if there's an illegitimate child? Okay? What if there's an illegitimate child? Then, same rules apply, except your free portion is now lessened because of rule number 4, which is that an illegitimate child gets 1/2 the share of a legitimate child. So your free portion is now left at 6.25%. Okay? So that's it for legitimes. That's a very important fact that you have to know. Legitimes. Okay? So oftentimes people ask me, attorney, can I make a last will? I want to give everything to my only son. The daughters, kasi keto. Okay? Is that valid? The answer is no. Because we have mandatory inheritance. What you can do, however, is you give the entitled 0.5 million, the free portion, you give it to your only son if you want. Okay? Yun pwede. But you cannot give everything to the son alone. Okay? So, that being said, let's proceed to tools in succession. Okay, earlier the facts. Now, let's go to the tools in succession. Number one, the last will and testament. What is a last will and testament? A last will and testament is simply a document wherein you specify how you want your properties to be divided when you die. That's it. It's as simple as that. Now, there are two types of last will and testament. On the right-hand side, you have what we call the holographic will. And on the left-hand side, you have what we call the notarial will. The holographic will, very simple. It's a will that you can make by yourself today. Because the only requirement for a holographic will is that it is handwritten by you and it is dated and signed by you. There is no other requirement. You don't need to have it notarized, no need to notarize. Doesn't even need to be in a bond paper. It can be a scratch paper, a tissue paper is already valid. As long as it is completely handwritten by you and signed and dated by you, that is already a valid will. There is also no specific language or form that is required. It can be as simple as, I, Kesterson Kua, want to leave my property in Alabang to my son letter A. Number 2, I want to leave my property in Valenzuela to my daughter. Number 3, I want to leave my car to my son. Yun. It can be as simple as that. That is already valid. That is already valid. Subject again to the rules on legitim that we discussed earlier. Okay? But that holographic will is already valid. The second type of will is what we call a notarial will. This is a will that you get from me, from a lawyer. And actually, you don't need to go to a lawyer to do it. Because you can just do a holographic will. The notarial will is very complicated. We need to have it notarized. There needs a presence of a lawyer is required. The presence of 2 witnesses is also required. Okay, and then there are other formalities. For example, the pages must be numbered. There must be a verification. Maraming requirements. But the notarial will is not really required. You can have a simple holographic will. That one you can do today, right after our talk. The notarial will, very, very formal. People ask me, Attorney, if that's the case, why do we have notarial wills? Bakit kailangan pa ng notarial will? You make a notarial will if you know your children are not in good terms. If you think that one of your children is greedier than others, if you think that one of your children can forge your signature, then we do a notarial will. Because it happens, Yadre, Michael, Kevin, sige gina, tienchut, sige wijok, ikong inawbe siya. Wano, talaga, Diyos ang polo. Kasi why paligin ako? Paano ako na po siya, wijok ko? Ikinulaw no, boy, how siya, yung butyo nga ba siya? Right? So, if you feel one of your children is a little bit more materialistic, then you will need a notarial. Okay? But right now, friends, I suggest tonight, I assume you came here today because you want to know about this topic, right? It might be a concern in your life. Right now, tonight, when you go home, get a piece of paper. Yellow pad, bond paper, even scratch paper, pwede. You get a ball pen, and then you just write down your last will. Okay? No, honestly. You write down your last will. Di naman, no? Now, what are the things I suggest you include? Number 1, name an executor if you want to, optional. Number 2, be specific. Number 3, know the concept of a legislative. Number 4, very important when you make the last will. Inform your heirs, especially if it's a holographic will. Inform your heirs. You do not make a last will and testament and then put it in your safety deposit box. Okay? And then you just hide it. That's not the correct way of handling it. Good practice, no, for last will is you make a last will and then you call a family meeting and you inform your children that this is my last will. In fact, if possible, you have your children sign as witnesses in your last will. Because a last will that nobody knows about is useless. Mag-aaway pa rin sila. Okay? And last tip when it comes to a last will is you have to update your last will. Okay? You can always change your will anytime you want. You know my mom? She updates her will every December. So every December, when we're either abroad or in the Philippines, she will call a meeting after dinner. Talagang, and it always has to be Christmas. So sinisira na Christmas namin. She will call a meeting between me and my sister. Hindi niya sinasama dad ko. And she will tell, oh, this is my new will for this year, ha? Oh, lanong buhay si Tessie. For example, kining buhay si Tessie ito eh. So, huwag kayo sa Hawaii will. Oh, hindi, sige ito eh. What total show? Kasi sinibet at deep for it. That's an example. But that's how you do it. You update your will. It's not supposed to be standard. Okay? Now, second tool. So first tool we have the last will and testament. The last will and testament, it's important because it makes your wishes known to your children. And if your children know what you want, then there's a higher chance they will not fight. Because they can easily say, oh, this is Papa I. Papa Kautan. It's very clear that change. Second tool we have in succession to preserve harmony is what we call the family constitution. What is a family constitution? It's very simple. It sounds complicated, but it's a very simple thing. It is simply the rules that govern the family business. And this is important to us spiritually. Okay? These are the rules that govern the family business. And what are the components of a family constitution? Number 1, you have the mission and vision for the business. Number 2, we have the core family values. Number 3, employment and compensation policies for the family. Number 4, family benefits. 5, ownership and dividends. And last, family governance. We'll go over these one by one. First, very, very important, if not the most important portion of a family constitution, the mission and vision for your business. What is your goal as a business? Many of our companies have a mission vision statement. Okay? I want you to review that. Is that mission vision statement, does that really reflect your goal for the business? Why is the mission and vision for the business important? It's very simple. Because when the children, this is assuming your children are all in the business, when the children have a disagreement, for example, they can always go back to the mission vision statement of the business to defend their position. So an example of a mission and vision statement for the business is, I have a client, their mission vision for the statement for the business. Our business is given to us by God. This is not ours, we are merely stewards. That was part of their mission vision. And so now, when the dad passed away, he passed away 2 years ago. We did the family constitution 4 years ago. You know, there are 4 brothers, si Katia, the Juan Negesandi. Up to now, when they expand, when they discuss things like taking a loan for expansion, when they discuss about, making a new business, they always remind themselves, we're stewards, okay? So even up to now, they have a fund for charity works and for church contributions. That is not, hindi nila ginagalaw. I mean, they continue pursuing that. Because it's very clear to them from the start that the business is merely, they're really holding this business as a stewardship for God. Another example I have, another one of my clients, their mission vision for the business is that they want to be a global Christian business. Okay? That was clear. The father said, I am a businessman. I want my children to be competitive, but at the same time, I do not want them to forget our identity as a Christian. So their mission and vision for the business, they want to go global, but they want to stick to their Christian roots. Why is that important? Because now, and that was very important, because the father is still alive, but the children are effectively running the business now. So last year, when we had the board meeting, I was an independent director in their board. The question was whether they were going to expand, whether they were going to build a new plant in Vietnam. They're in apparels. Okay. They were questioning, should we make a new, can we expand in Vietnam? And one of the brothers said, no. Okay. Two of them wanted yes, but one of them said no. But at the end of the day, the one who said no, the shorty said, okay lang, sige, tuloy na natin because anyway, our mission is to become global. We want to be a big business. As long as we don't forget our Christian family. So, the mission and vision statement, it helps when the next generation need to make a decision. Okay, it helps. Second component of a family constitution is your core family values. Because our businesses are family institutions, the family constitution should include your core family values. Okay? What is your core family value? For example, marijuana is becoming legal in certain parts of the world. The US, Thailand, it's legal. Is it okay for your children one day to expand the business to marijuana if it becomes legal in the Philippines? Is that okay with you? Is it okay for your family, for your children or your grandchildren to one day use company money to expand into the liquor business, to the cigarette business? Recently, one of the questions asked of me, attorney, do you think it's okay if we expand to the pogo business? And this was last year. For that family that wanted to expand to the pogo business, they were not Christians, but they had a family constitution. And in their family constitution, the father clearly said, we do not want to be involved with any form of gambling. So I told the children, by the way, the father already passed away for 10 years. Let's go back to your family constitution. Okay? It doesn't allow. So respect. Okay? So core family values. What are the things that the family will not compromise on? These are guiding principles for the family. Third, and this is a very practical aspect, employment and compensation. The family constitution should set out your employment and compensation rules for the family. This should answer the question, number one, who can be employed in the family business? Number two, what are the conditions for employment? You know, one of the things that I always tell family businesses is that the family business is not supposed to be a backup plan for children who fail in life. If the family business is a backup plan for children who fail in life, okay, the children who go out to drink and go to the clubs until 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and then the next day, they cannot wake up, they go to the office late, and all they do is they go to the bank, update the passbook, and then tapos yung trabaho nila. If you do that, if your business is a backup plan for your children, it's gonna fail. You're not gonna make it to the second generation. It will fail. It will really fail. Because the family business is not supposed to be the backup plan for children who fail in life. Instead, the family business should be where the best and the brightest of the family go to. Because the family business is part of our legacy. It is part of our identity as businessmen. It is. It is. And the family business is very much tied with the family. So, certain principles I have there that I always tell my clients. Number one, it's not supposed to be a backup plan. If it's a backup plan, something's wrong. It's not going to survive. Number two, you want the business to grow, you put the best in the brightest. What does that mean when we want to put our best in the brightest? That means that we have to pay them properly. I know a lot of family businesses that don't pay their children properly because they say, what's with 醋naman, kabakya, itenzimen pala, hakwigun pala, soy nang bagun, soy ditloa, diba? Friends, bukod na tayo sa intiyo. Number one, the Bible tells us, leave and cleave. Number two, if you pay someone 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, then you expect them to handle a very big business with 1,000 employees or even 100 employees lang. And they have so many problems every day and you pay them that amount. Do you think they will be happy? Will they want to stay? No, they won't. Especially if they're good. Because they have other opportunities outside. So, one guiding principle, pay your children properly under the assumption that we have the best and the brightest in the business. By the way, not all the children need to be in the business. That's another big pitfall. All the children are in the business. How can the business survive? It might survive the second generation. It might be able to support the second generation. But how will it support the third generation? It cannot. Not everyone needs to be in the business, but those who are in the business must be paid properly. Okay? Number four, part of a family constitution that I always recommend is to put a portion on family benefits. And family benefits, it talks about what benefits do family members derive from the family business. So these benefits, generally, I recommend two things. Number one, an annual family trip that is sponsored by the business. Whether the children or the shareholders are part of, whether they're employed or not, okay? They should still be part, as long as they're part of the family. We sponsor, if we are financially able, we sponsor a family trip. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be abroad, it can be as simple as a Tagaytay overnight trip. It can be as simple as a Boracay overnight trip. Okay, it does not have to be expensive. But what is important is that there is a company-sponsored trip with the goal that to bond. Okay, to bond and to update the family on what's happening with the business. That's number one. Number two, I also recommend, if you're thinking about making a family constitution, I recommend you make a family welfare fund. Okay? The family constitution is not just for your children. It's supposed to last until your great-great-great-grandchildren. Okay? And somewhere along the line, unfortunately, we see that there are descendants who fail in life. There are black sheep in the family. And I'm sorry, it's just reality. Right? It might not be among your children, but maybe among your grandchildren. One of them falls under drugs. One of them falls under alcoholism. Maybe not your children, but maybe your grandchildren. I recommend you create a family welfare fund that will provide the basic necessities for these individuals and their family. When I say basic necessity, I don't mean an air-conditioned condominium in BGC. I mean a simple living living accommodation, an apartment, no aircon, just electric fan. You buy food for them, no? You buy wet market, palengke for them every week. Basic, but enough that their children can have a certain standard of living na acceptable to your family. Kasi that's still gonna be your grandchildren or great-grandchildren, right? The one we're protecting is not the person who made the mistake, who fell under drugs or alcoholism, but rather his next generation, his children. So part of the General Welfare Fund, I recommend subsidy for private schooling, a simple private school, because we want to give his next generation a chance to go back up. That's the purpose of a general welfare fund. Now, why should this be part of your family constitution? Because if you don't put this in your family constitution, your children or your grandchildren might not be willing to share that money out when that time comes. So it has to be a separate fund. Because you do not expect that your grandchildren who you have never met will feel the same way as you. Okay? Next, ownership and dividends. In the family constitution plays a rule. Who can be an owner? Okay? By the way, please understand, the concept of an owner is different from the concept of an employee. A person, your child, can be both an owner and an employee of the company. He can also just be an owner and not an employee. Okay? He can hold shares, but he is not employed. That means he only gets dividends at the end of the year, but he does not get a salary. That's allowed. Okay? So ownership and dividends, who can be an owner and what are the rules on dividends? One of the biggest problems of Filipino Chinese businesses, we leave so much cash in the business. When a business has too much cash and it's not being divided, you're leaving a very big temptation for whoever is in charge of the company to use that cash for his own benefit. It's a temptation. So my recommendation is you put a rule. How much of net profits every year have to be issued out as dividends? Never leave too much cash for the business unless there's a plan for that cash. Last but definitely not the least, for family constitution, family governance. How do we resolve conflict in the family? Okay, this rule is very important. What happens if your children fight? Who is responsible to mediate? Who is responsible to call them together and try to resolve that problem? For this, I recommend you create a council of elders. Okay, and then maybe also get a independent consultant, to help mediate. But put in a rule, who is the council of elders, so that if there is a fight among the children or the grandchildren, we know who is responsible to try and resolve that. Hindi maghihintayan. Kasi what happens is, no one moves kasi tagilang rehearse. Okay? So, we're done with family constitution. Third tool, very simple lang to, it's not as long as family constitution, trust agreements. Trust agreements. What is a trust agreement? It sounds very fancy, something you hear in movies, but it's very simple. A trust agreement is a contract. Okay? It's a contract of relationship. And it involves three parties. Number one, the trustor or the original owner. That is you. You're the trustor. You are the original owner. Second party, a trustee. A person who will manage the property for you. And then third is the beneficiary, or the person who will enjoy the fruits of that property. So for example, you have a building in Makati that you're leasing out. Okay? You're old. Unfortunately, your son, who you love so much, is very irresponsible. And you are afraid that if you leave the building to him, he will just sell it. And then, mauubos na pera. That's your fear. So what do you do? One option is a trust agreement. So what you do is, you enter into an agreement normally with a bank, let's say Metrobank. And you tell Metrobank, hold it building, can you manage it for me? I want you to manage the building, charge me a certain amount, and then whatever the rental is, you give to my son. Or a portion of the rental you give to my son. That is a trust agreement. You are the trustor, Metrobank is the trustee, and your son is the beneficiary. Why is a trust agreement very important? Because It's a tool for you to control the liquidity, the finances, even after you're no longer here. Okay? Because even when you pass away, Metrobank can continue holding the asset for you and then disposing the proceeds pursuant to the trust agreement. So it can be, that's a very simple way of, that is a very simple example. But normally, it's a bit more complicated than that. For example, normally we tell the bank we give 20% for giving expenses, and then 30% you invest it in a fund for the college education of the children, and then 50% will be distributed to my grandchildren, meaning di na idadaan kay anak, dadaan na diretsyo sa next generation. 50% you give it to them when they reach 30 years old. So that to ensure that the next generation, that the father won't spend everything. So we can tailor fit the trust agreement depending on what you want. Okay? And the beneficiary cannot touch it, cannot touch the main principal. Normally you do this with a bank. Okay? So when you trust agreements, when should you think about using a trust agreement? Two instances. Number one, you have a problematic child or a problematic grandchild. And you know, if you leave the property to them, mauubos. Or, you have a problematic daughter or son-in-law. You can use a trust agreement to make sure that that property is safe. In the second instance, if you have a special child in the family who cannot take care of themselves, you put a property in trust for them so that their medication can be, and their lifestyle can be sustained after you are gone. Okay. Last, you have the concept of a usufruct agreement, and this is my favorite. What is a usufruct agreement? A usufruct agreement is simply a contract that provides or gives the right to use the property for your entire lifetime. This is my agreement, this is my favorite, because this protects us against our children and our in-laws. Okay? This protects us against our children and our in-laws. Unfortunately, sometimes people change. Sometimes your children change. You can never guarantee that they will be treating you the same way today as 10 years, 20 years from now. So, but a lot of people say, but attorney ko ay swat ng bunkado, hanggun wale. Kasi, you know, the values are cheaper. Why ako wale, in Kiamwan. Why swallow? I want to transfer it now while I'm alive. But what's my protection if I transfer it while I'm alive? This is your protection, a usufruct agreement. The usufruct agreement, it's very simple. It's just a contract between you and your son or your daughter. And then in the usufruct agreement, it says na they acknowledge that the property is given to them by you and that you have the right to use the property for your entire lifetime and that they cannot sell it without your consent. So for example, if what you're giving them is your house, no? You have the right to use that house your entire lifetime. If you heard, I don't know if you heard the story, yung kumalat na chismis about sigalan ng Caballo Verde, Inka, Kanshu, Kan Zinibiao, Inka Kevin, and then Itang Iesimpo Tatsuki. That's my client. They're my clients. They didn't sign a usufruct agreement. The proper, they were, kana intanong tangin Simpo Tatsuki. Kasi, inhitetuero, kaya inkangkap simbuhin niya through a legal sale. So, on paper, they really did not have ownership. That could have been resolved with a usufruct agreement. So, for the aunties and uncles here, you go see my mom. Chismis my mom. She knows everything. She has all of this. You need a template, don't go to me. Go to Arlene Kua. Now, we're about to end soon. Okay? Practical tips to avoid fighting. Practical tips to avoid fighting. Number one, do not give joint ownership of properties, especially residential properties. A lot of us have properties and then we put our children's name in the title. If it's a residential property, that's wrong. Don't. Because how can 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 families share in one residential property? Hindi. What's the purpose of a residential property? To live in. It's not really investment. I mean, it's not really to lease out most of the time. It's to live in. So, imagine your son lives in that house, but the title, it includes his brother and sister's names. They will never feel secure. So, rule number 1, do not give joint ownership of properties, especially residential properties. For commercial properties, the same rule applies. In general, do not give joint ownership except if you don't want the property to be sold. You just want them to rent it out or to use the property. Then in that case, okay lang joint ownership because they won't be able to sell it and they can divide the rental easily. Okay? But in general, do not give joint ownership of properties. Also, do not put several properties under one holding corporation. That's the old rule. Before kasi, estate tax was 20%. So people put it under a corporation so that the taxes will be cheaper. They will just transfer the shares of stock to their children. Now, estate taxes again, 6%. So that rule no longer applies. It's the same. Same na yung tax rate with shares of stock. So, it is no longer wise to put all your assets, all your properties under a holding corporation. And then you put all your children in that holding corporation. Because what happens is there is a high chance they will start fighting. Kasi what if 5 children, anya kan Jose, kan Utia, te di te sa te si asigwe pai, tego unfortunately kan Gabo, or tutyo sa nitoy apay. Swak ba kung, go ay buhay, lang si Tetwe, go ay buhay. Kasi wa siya siya, kiyam yan si. Ahya kung, pag nagkanabi buhay, wag kiyam yan, nan ko tansak ay buhay, duki ke. That will be a conflict. Right? Feeling ni Shorty, wa si owner. Wa si ukod. Tana, mo betsak, wa diya, kiyam yan. Right? So, do not give joint ownership of properties. As much as possible, one child, one property. Okay? Number 2, have clear rules on who can join the family business. Dani bokso tamay ko tiku ko kwani simple kwani bokap. Right? Ikyo, Bokso, remember what you call them? Does anyone remember what they call husbands, spouses? Bokso kyo, Jim Tao Pui. Okay? Pillow monsters, Jim Tao Pui. It's important, friends, that you have clear rules on who can join the family business. Are in-laws allowed to join the family business? My rule? No. Because you never know who they are, who they truly are. It's already complicated enough for your children to not fight. Magpapasok ka pa ng iba. So, my rule, no in-laws. Number 2, on who can join the family business. What are the requirements for your descendants to join the business? Do you require them to finish a college degree? Okay? If they don't finish a college degree, what's the alternative path? Normally, we put in, they have to work outside for 4 years or 5 years before they can join the family business. Okay? So you need to put in clear rules who can join the family business. Why? Again, we go back. The family business is not supposed to be a backup plan. It's supposed to be where the best and the brightest of the family go. Number 3, as we discussed already earlier, pay your children properly. Pay your children properly. Because we want them to stay in the business. Okay? And in the end, it will also go to them. Number 4, understand generational gaps. Understand generational gaps. And this is for the younger people in the audience. You need to preserve family harmony. You want to preserve family harmony, understand generational gaps. First, understand that your parents are also undergoing transition. For the younger people, our transitions very exciting. We're entering into new businesses, we're expanding, or we're experiencing new things. For the older generation, for our parents, it's different. Their transition is they're slowing down. Okay? They now have more time in their hands. So you need to understand that what their needs and your needs, their priorities and your priorities are different. So sometimes, many clients go to me and say, Attorney, I don't understand my parents anymore. Parang ang galing-galing nila magtampo. Lahat na lang na ginagawa ko mali. Okay? And it brings conflict in the family. How do you resolve that? Understand generational gaps. Maybe, for the younger generation, maybe you're forgetting that their parents, again, they're going through transition, they have more time in their hands. What they're looking for is not economic achievement from you, but rather emotional. An emotional relationship with you. Okay? Kasi many of my generation, when we were young, our parents were working very hard. So they were not very, emotional with us. They were not very sweet with us. And then suddenly, when we're starting our own careers, suddenly matampuhin mga parents natin. And you start thinking, why is it like that? Why are they suddenly so emotionally needy? Itingmay to siyan eh. Why? Because they're undergoing their own transitions. That's one. Number two, understand communication differences. For the current generation, okay, why the kuike? Okay. Sige po, ipat ko kami ako sa'yo. Good text na, ipat ko kami, good text ko. Hear na. Okay? Hear na. Or okay, or even K lang, minsan K lang. For them, for the current young generation, that is perfectly normal. They do not mean disrespect. But for older generation, grabe, bastos naman mo, kaya sige, kako, text. Okay? Isa pa, for the older generation, and this is now geared to the younger generation, to the young people. Young people, don't forget that our ways of communicating is different from the way our parents communicate. Number one, they did not grow up with text. Instead, they grew up with phone calls. For the young people here, when was the last time, for the young people who are married, when was the last time you gave your parents a call, a phone call, just to say, Ma, how are you? Ma, di kinatyo nga, yung sabi ko, Pa, di okay po, di kaya siya. When was the last time you gave a phone call? For my generation below, phone calls are not normal. We don't like phone calls. Kasi we feel it's very intrusive on our personal space. But for the older generation, friends, a phone call is normal. It shows affection. It shows care. It shows right? So understand generational gaps. Last, understand cultural differences for generational gaps. And this is again geared towards the young people. Understand cultural differences. A lot of clients that go to me, they say, kung papa, bosyan kya goy. Kung papa, mamatak man, hindi toxic lang, bo kya goy. We never felt na, kunya, na intiago, na in care. And then I ask them why. Why do they say that? They will say, inumpat, muagon. Inumpat ka gun kong, sabi, good night ta ami, good kun bo kami, good night. Hindi to good lang. Pero good night, umpat niya tiyo. I love you, umpat niya tiyo. Right? And I hear this from, 40 years old below. Common complaint. And it causes family issues. And I tell them, you have to understand that there's a cultural difference. We, our generation, the younger generation, grew up with American TV as our standard. So we grew up with the concept of a American dad. The one that hugs you, the one that plays ball, that plays basketball or baseball with you. The one that says good night and reads a book to you. But for the young people, understand that your parents did not grow up with that kind of culture. For your parents, their main way of expressing love is right? Or they hold the best piece of the dish in the meat. That is how they show their affection. You cannot compare apples and oranges. You cannot use the standard of an American dad to judge a Chinese father. It's unfair. So for the young people here, and I see several of you, understand that your parents grew up with a different cultural context and appreciate them for what they are. Because an American dad will kick you out at 18 years old. An American dad will not pay for your wedding. An American dad leaves everything to you. Wala na. Once you're 18, it's done. A Chinese father, on the other hand, as much as he is able to, he will support you financially. Even when you're already 30 years old, 35 years old. Perfect example, Bonnie Tonto. Sai namin. The Kuihero. The Kanshuro. You know, he's sponsoring all of them to an all-expense paid trip to Greece and Turkey. What the hell now? How pencil? You don't get that with an American father. You cannot judge a Filipino Chinese father with the standards of an American father. It's not fair. Last, form good family relations. This is the most important factor. Form good family relations. And this is something that is done very early on for the young couples here. I see many of you. Form good family relations. You do not expect your children to be in good terms with each other if right now as children they are already always fighting with each other. Do not expect a miracle that when they become 24 years old, they graduate from college, they suddenly become best friends with a brother that they try to kill because they're always fighting. It's not realistic. You have to start forging good family relations now while they're still young. It's never too late. Okay? One thing I observed with my VIP clients, the clients who grew up in big mansions and they had their own rooms, they had their own PlayStations, they had their own yayas, they do not grow up close to their siblings. It's an observation. I do not have any official data to back it up, just my own observation from my own clients that work with me. My clients who live in Forbes, my clients who live in Basma, and they grow up there with big houses, they're not close. But my clients who came from working class families, who had to share a room, who had to share a bathroom, they grew up close. And it's easier now to compromise. And silang petiko. Kasi lang si Katia. Now, there's room to negotiate. So form good family relations. Last portion na talaga. Fix if there is already an issue in the family. What if your children are already fighting? Number one, get a mediator. Very important. Get a mediator. A third person who your children respect. Get a mediator. Don't think na yakay-set ang langsay. Your family is more important than your reputation. And it's not something to be ashamed of. Number two, understand that your children might not be the best people to run your business. It is not necessary that your children always run your own business. Because it is also possible, if your children are always fighting about the business, maybe it's better none of them gets the business. Instead, formalize and professionalize the business. None of them become employees, but all of them are shareholders. They just get dividends. Right? Third, accept that the business legacy may have to be sacrificed to buy harmony in the family. In other words, this one, and this is something that I just saw in person last week with a very prominent Philippine family. What I'm saying here is, you might have to sell the business. Well, that very prominent Chinese family, they live in New Manila, they have a very big compound. They're in the lighting business. I was expecting that the father, when the family went to me, when they consulted with me, I was expecting the father would be very traditional and saying that the business should always come first, that the children have to protect the legacy of the business. But you know what? I was surprised. Because on our first meeting pa lang, in Naukay Queen's Week, ikong attorney, why cut yung utiga dito okay? Sign gina, etawdi, kan si Kuanikaw, Sandi, buhay siya kong, okay? Ne-rolls yabi, inyasyong letak. Then he left in front of all the children and the wife. He told them, if you cannot get along because of the business, then buhay sa. Kasi bobo, I did come. That was his words. First meeting. Din na buhay tao din. Na nesang nila ni buhay. Kasi bobo, I did come. Accept that there is a chance that you may have to sell the business. Because the business legacy the harmony in the family should not be sacrificed for the sake of a business legacy. As I end, as parents, we work hard to earn for our children. Thus, wouldn't it be the saddest thing in the world if our money is what ends up dividing them against each other? I invite all of you to take a look at Genesis 25, verses 5 to 6. And this is about Abraham. You know, when we talk about succession planning, it's not new. Abraham faced it in his own time. In Genesis chapter 25, verses 5 to 6, Abraham left everything he owned to his son Isaac. But while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Even for Abraham, he took charge, he took responsibility to resolve any potential conflict. I invite you to do the same. Don't shy away. Din mang kya bekang sige tayo sige. Iniyan na ho kang ko. Unya din boy buntoy. Kan sige buntoy ako pili. Si kong din lautan din ka. Din lautan din na. Kasi sige buntoy diyan. Talaga din. Okay? Do not forget that your money is still yours. Okay? I feel many parents are afraid of their children. Iniabo ay kampi at sige kasi inkya inigina buhay huati, inkya insyuki, inkya insimpuay intabawa ay kamkosin. Don't forget na sige as of now, hanlan wakle land of one. Soy, siya nga ako kantahin ko ay ginako. Sumapun, lautin. Dimang, yok ko, inekay ko. Binabawa ng kay kwato, inko kabawa ng kay kwato. So that's it. Thank you for time.
Now we'll be beginning the questions and answers portion. It looks like nanti na question ko.
I would just like to ask, kung hanap ng buhay, halimbawa, for example lang, di ba, even if Guntong, whatever kind of will, is still subject to things that is determined by the value.
Officially, that is determined by the zonal values.
Zonal values, which comes to another problem. Kasi nasaya kung the actual value, market value is much higher. So, buong guarantee, no? Kasi yung one na eko, 1K. And even if you get a, kasi value
Appraiser.
appraiser ko. But that value changes over time din. So by the time you're dead, away na naman.
Okay.
So how do you resolve that?
Okay. How do we resolve that? Number one, we have to be very transparent with our children. It will never be 100% equal. Even if you want it 50-50, let's say you have 2 children, it will never be 100% equal. Because valuations differ. Until you sell a property, you don't really know how much it's worth, number one. Number two, values change over time. Bina, San Miguel na kung let's say, i-Rizal Key, Sine, whatever, the properties in Rizal will suddenly go up in value. So it will never be equal. What's important is that at the time that you make your will, you specify to your children already what you want them to get. If one day one child gets more because the property became more, okay. Buwat lang ko, kuisi lang, man kuisi lang, be, inangitong ina. Kolang lang niya.
So I have 3 questions lang. So first one, for the holographic will, so you mentioned that you can update it every year, right? How do you dispose of the previous one that you made? Is there a proper way to do it?
Okay, there's no proper way to do it, but normally I recommend you just cross it out. Okay, you cross it out, replace it.
And then for my second question, for the usufructs agreement, in your example, you mentioned that the father wants to, the owner wants to put
Transfer the property.
transfer the property to the anak, but they don't get to sell it as long as during his lifetime. So once the father passes away, they can sell it as long as the 2 children are in agreement that they want to sell the property.
Well, it depends on who owns the property. If the father gave it to only one child, and then wala na si Papa, the usufruct is cancelled. So the child can now sell it if he wants to.
But can the father also stay in the usufruct even past his lifetime?
No, he cannot.
Only during the
Only during the lifetime. The usufruct is only valid during the lifetime.
Then for my last question, so medyo ano lang,
If you want to control the property past your lifetime, you do it through a trust. You do it through a trust agreement.
for the last question, it's more of an example. So for example, there are 4 children, 2 are a bit problematic. One is very aloof or doesn't share, and then the one the best and brightest, to say. So syempre you mentioned that there are mandatory inheritances na hindi pwede, hindi i-name yung other 3. But what about bank accounts? So for example, the parents both have bank accounts na nakapangalan na N or C, best and brightest. Does it have to be named sa inheritance or even part of their mandatory?
Okay, so number 1, when we say the net estate, when we say when we talk about the legitimo, it does not mean that every child should have equal shares in each and every property. Okay? You can decide. The only goal is each one gets a value more or less the same. So for the bank account, it's also treated like a property. So, pwedeng may cash dito kay panganay, the others don't have cash. It's allowed. So in your example, it's okay to have only one child be in the bank account.
I have a question for you as well on a more practical matter. Chinese people in general are very allergic about the topic of death or passing. How would you introduce the idea of talking about family inheritance to say a mother or a father who doesn't want to talk about death?
The best way in my experience, find a common friend, someone they are close to, who is willing to talk about it, or who actually prepared their own will already. That's the best. Normally, you're looking at people 80 years old above who are very, very hesitant to discuss. The best way to convince them, find a common friend, one of their good friends who made a will. Then they might be interested. All right, thank you.
We have a lot of questions regarding legitims, but we have a very special case question. For those here who are single, what will happen to their inheritance when they pass? What happens to the portions that they have?
So if you're single and you don't have children, the rule is it goes up. Okay? So if your parents are still alive, then your estate goes to them. If your parents are no longer here, then it goes to your siblings. Okay? It goes to your siblings. If you don't have siblings anymore, then it goes to your relative of fourth consanguinity, your cousin. After cousins, pag wala na. The government takes over. And then the nephew will fall under 4. But if it goes past 4, no more.
Just to clarify when it comes to extrajudicial settlements. Say for example, in the case of the extrajudicial settlements whereby everybody in the family, so all the heirs, agree. For example, I donate my full estate to the church or whatever. Basta nag-sign sila for clarification, it's legal. Correct?
Yes.
So no longer, I don't need to heed the legitims if everybody signs.
Yes. But it will be treated as a donation. By the way, we have 1 year from death to pay the taxes. If it's not paid within 1 year, the BIR will impose penalties, 2% per month. Compounded.
So regarding trust agreements now, is there special conditions you would attach to it? For example, the questioner says, can you attach a time to when the trust will be released? Or do you have an expiration for the trust itself?
Okay, yes. Just, first of all, number 1, yes, you can attach special conditions. Let's say, you can attach that if my son marries a Filipino Chinese, a female, the trust will be cancelled and he gets the property. You can do that. Now, for the expiration, generally, a trust is for 20 years, unless you make it renewable. The general rule is for 20 years.
You mentioned that there are 3 parties involved in the trust agreement. The trust, the person,
The trustor,
trustee, beneficiary. Can the truster, the second party, also be the beneficiary of said funds?
No, because it won't be a trust agreement anymore. It won't serve the purpose. Because the purpose of the trustee is to hold the property independently, so that to make sure that the property is preserved, that it won't it's preserved.
Where is there such a thing as a perpetual trust? Because you said 20 years. Or
Okay.
what happens, let's say you die already and the trust is in place for 20 years. And then, after 20 years and your heir is still alive,
What happened? So in the Philippines, if under Philippine law, that's a gray area because the law is not clear. However, in general, the banks only do it for 20 years here. If you want a trust that will survive for more than 20 years, na sure, na concrete, I suggest we do it in a foreign jurisdiction, like Singapore or Hong Kong, if you're in Southeast Asia. If you're in Northern America, Canada is a good place. If you're in Europe naman, the best place is London to do the trust. Okay. So, if you're here, Southeast Asia though, Singapore or Hong Kong. Singapore, easier because they speak English, but Hong Kong, right now, the rates are lower for Hong Kong.
Thank you. We have a question from a wonderful gentleman. This is regarding compensation naman. How, assuming this is a business that has second generation and third generation people, children, I mean, how will the second generation decide the salary and the compensation for the third generation entering family business?
Okay, for that, I suggest you get a compensation consultant. There are independent compensation consultants who can help you with deciding how much. But in general, I want you to take a look at several factors. Number one, what is the value of this person outside? Okay, but that's just one factor. You don't determine everything based on that, what they can get outside. Number two, what is the value of this person to the company? In other words, how much is our loss if nawala siya? How much will it take to replace him for us? Okay. Those are the two main considerations that you have to take in. That you have to think about when it comes to compensation. I don't suggest that you factor in cost of living. Kasi a lot of Chinese families, that's what they base their salary on. Papayos yung ikaw may wati kang ukaw, sa nisi ukaw. I don't suggest doing that. It's very subjective. Kasi for ukonan, for papa, taksya, it's well. For gika, kung na ako yung ako ka nang taksya. Right? It's very subjective. So I suggest base it on value. Value outside and value in.
So, a lot of Chinese people here will have maybe only 1 or 2 homes in their lifetimes. How will you divide that property under the patriarch's name equally to a spouse and the children? How do you manage one property split among many people?
Okay, let's say, land ng 2, okay? And then, mangigina, so that's very simple. 1 house per child. Yung spouse, leave their name in the house. Or if they don't want to, if they want to transfer it, sign a usufruct agreement. Diba? So solve it. The more problematic issue is where there's only 1 big house and there are 3 or 4 children. And that we see a lot of that in Corinthian cottage school. Okay? Atty. But they have 3 or 4 children, ibuhat ang buhay sa Sita Corinthian kasi siya may 8. Okay? Then in that case, you might have to sell. The solution, sell. If you might have to sell the Corinthian property and then buy smaller properties for your 4 children. We see a lot of that. People who sell their houses in Green Hills, Corinthian, Forbes, and then they buy condos or smaller houses for their children.
What happens if, say, a child will inherit a property, but this child has plans on going abroad or immigrating to another country?
Then you need to have an honest conversation with that child. Okay? When it comes to estate succession, communication, yaman type yung child. So you have to have an honest conversation with your child. Di si Betiang niya, si Betiang suki. Okay? In a betsutko, then you can now make an informed decision. You want to sell it or you want to give it to someone else. Diba? Kasi in a betsutko, then that probably means assuming yes, I pang or ego, then that means you need cash. So either maybe help him buy a property abroad, or you just hold the cash until you're sure of his lifetime. Kasi, by the way, if one of your children tells you they want to go abroad, I do not recommend that you buy property for him abroad immediately. You wait, kasi nakikita ko, a lot of them come back. I suggest you wait 5 years. If they're really settled there, then help them with the down payment in Sakiko. You can do that.
We have yet some more questions regarding mandatory inheritance and like the free portion. For example, if there are no legal heirs, no children of the family.
Yes, if there are no more legal heirs, no children, no ascendants, no nephews, no nieces, then you can make a last will. There will be no more legitimate. So you can give out, you want, walang song kuitiaw, batang kao ko eh. Kasi walang song kuitiaw, batang whoever pwede. You can make a will. But my parents pa hindi, may legitimate pa si parents.
Okay. Is it okay to put up a holding company for properties that are being made for the children? Like, can a holding company manage properties meant for children?
Okay, sige. So let's talk about holding companies. Should you make a holding company? The answer is if it's a property that you want to sell in the future. Actually, first of all, yes, it's okay to put properties under a holding company. But if it's a property that you plan to sell in the future, let's say you want to, let's say it's purely for speculation or investment. Because one day, and then your plan is to really sell it one day. Then you can make a holding company, but make sure that that holding company only holds that one property. Meaning, hite kung siyo, bekwa site toyo. Kasi, di hite kung sinakwa sigo, te ko, and then you want to sell, the taxes will be very high. Because you have to actually sell the land. And you will be subjected to 12% VAT, 1.5% documentary stamp tax, 20 to 30% income tax. Malaki. Malaki. Versus, if your holding company only holds one asset, and you want to sell that asset, what we do is we sell the shares of the company. That way, we will only be charged 6% capital gains, based pa on book value. So, yaman tayo syok lang. If we sell the entire corporation, instead of selling the asset itself. Okay? Pero di na si Kong, di sige Kong si diya, so ite ito eh. Ya hangko, che buyer na rin buhay nung zong kasi yan. So dito, siya, dito sige buhay. If that happens, then we will be subject to a very high tax. So the rule is, if it's a holding company, and the goal is to sell the property, one property per company.
Those properties are named children. Tapos, subdivide isa-isa. Parang marami siyang properties. Tapos, ang name is, sa name ng mga bawat, lahat ng anak sa bawat property.
Lahat ng anak sa bawat property. That's the current status. Then, if the family is liquid, I suggest you transfer it na to just one. Sige, swallow. Okay. But, maraming factors to consider dyan. It's also possible we set up a holding corporation and then put one property each so that when they sell, they just divide it among themselves. But in general, if there are 4 or 5 or even 3 children in one title, yun yung ayaw. Kasi it's so difficult. You need the consent of everyone. Versus if it's a corporation, by the way. What's the difference if you put the property under a corporation with 5 people versus you put the property under the names of 5 people? Again, the difference between corporation with 5 shareholders holding the property, so the property is under the name of ABC Corporation, versus property under person 1, person 2, person 3. The difference is, if it's under the personal name, we need all of them to consent. If it's under corporation, majority lang. So it's easier, it's more equitable na majority. Kasi parang, hopefully they vote right, you know, and if they really feel na someone needs the help, you know, a majority will vote in their favor.
Which is more favorable to process if the parents are still alive and they want to manage these estates already? Is it better to pay inheritance tax or better to pay donation tax?
It's cheaper if it's donation tax. Kasi you're basing it on today's value. Kasi the prices keep going up eh. The BIR constantly changes. They update the zonal value every 2 years. So you expect in 2 years tataas na. So it's really cheaper to do it now if you have the liquidity. By the way, was there one question that, well, one problem that a lot of clients have is they actually don't have the cash to pay for the estate, right? That's where you go to Kevin Yap for life insurance. Life insurance is one tool to make sure that your children have enough liquidity to pay for the estate.
When the kids that you've entrusted properties to have passed away accidentally or by chance now, what happens to the money that you entrusted to them in the bank?
Okay, normally the trustee will require what we call a liquidation clause. So, nandun yun. It will include there a liquidation or a cancellation clause. And it will state there when the trust will be cancelled. So for example, upon the death of the beneficiary, that can be a liquidation event. Wherein upon the death of the beneficiary, the the trust is cancelled, and you will already mention there your instructions for the property. Who will it go to? So if there are no other children, you can specify it will go to the church or it will go to a charity. If there are other children, you can specify that this property, because my special child is already gone, then this property will go to my other children. But again, trust kasi is a very complicated matter. It is also governed. A factor to take into consideration in trust is the jurisdiction. I really like Singapore because they have very strong trust rules, very confidential, and they also have tax benefits. Although right now, the fee is really cheaper in Hong Kong. But in the Philippines, it's not that well developed. So Philippines, simpler, but still much cheaper. Philippines is still much cheaper, but it's a very simple type of trust lang, yung kayang gawin dito. By the way, if you're thinking the trust is for, okay, so how much should we need before a bank will accept a trust? Normally, properties or cash, 20 million about is the threshold for a trust to be rendered, to be worthwhile for the bank. The fees, mga 0.05% to 0.01% per annum.
Or follow-up lang question regarding sa donation. So I'm going back to the example of the 4 children. So what if during the parents are still alive right now, they donate one of their assets to the best and the brightest right now? When they pass away, will the donation be questioned or will it go back to...
It is still part of the estate. So donation, all donations made during the lifetime, remember our table kanina, that still forms part of the estate. All donations form part of the estate. It is actually illegal to transfer your properties through a deed of sale. Because in a sale, the requirement is that there should be an exchange of money. So, personally, I don't normally do deed of sale as a mode of transfer. Kasi, you have to have good breaks. So like one of the things in that situation, if it's a deed of sale, it's no longer part of the estate. So, pwedeng madaya yung iba if you do it through a deed of sale. So personally, I don't normally transfer properties from family members using a deed of sale. I normally do it through a deed of donation kasi I want to be transparent to everyone. I only do a deed of sale for very special reasons. Like if someone is about to pass away, then no choice tayo.
When you give a property as donation, it comes back into question when the father of the parents die.
Yes. So the donations done inter vivos, meaning donations done while you are alive, it is still supposed to be part of your estate for legitimate computation purposes.
But you are saying donation to whom?
To children.
Outside parties or to family members?
Actually, to everyone.
Anyone?
Yes, even donations to church. If let's say I have 100 million. So, let's say I have 100 million. I donate 80 million to church. And I only leave 20 million to my children. The 20 million is not enough for his legitimate, diba? So if he wants, when I die, he can actually question my donation to the church.
How will he question?
He will use the deed of donation to question.
But you're dead.
No, my son can question. But to be honest, it almost never happens, the questioning. I'm just answering these legally, theoretically, yes. But I have never handled a case where a child would question the donation to third parties. Ang naka-question is donation to other children. Yun naka-question.
Would the family get 20% after you pass away and continue to support the ministries? Okay, and then the company actually managed that we have a board of, so without guarantee the 20% can pass to the ministry.
Na 20% kuyitin na. Sure pass. Sure pass. May type po. Sure pass. Pero kung may kako, sana itong tiga video. Mga kaliway din nato, tiga si Boso ay, ko ay lang nabing sa pwedang tiga ko. No we joke in United States. Na po, technically, kao ko ito eh, Kyo pasok. Ibo ay gusto.
中业 company 20% of 到位。以我哋看你20% of 到位。
Kyo yung family constitution. Kyo ay ginasya. Tayo ito. Haniwan.
Okay, Kesterson, as a pastor, I've heard a lot of these things, but I don't know which is proper, which is right. Info mo, thì lang nakanilaw, intang sudza ingkehe. Imbitoy kinaw, pinapuntukiyo. Orang si kya kolo. Ikehe na puntukiyo, kasi bukutsak dila. Uwe lang iko, tangi wale, waking puntukiyo. So which is the right way to go? Both seems to go to the other extremes.
Ito ay punto eh, oh. Si Siyempre po, di ate punto eh.
It's not me!
Kasi si Siyempre po, di ate punto eh. Yan mo, si Juanzo eh. Ito eh, si Juanzo ito eh. Saan ito mo punto eh? The answer for me is somewhere in between. I agree we have to start distributing while we're alive. Kasi na po, di ba tan, yung say kuini, yung say din ka, baka tanis, life is unpredictable, baka isunsipan. Right? But at the same time, yung kung punalan po, kasi langit piyan. Sipit ginana kansyo, langit piyan. For the young people here cannot stress enough that the person you marry is the single most important decision you make in your life after salvation. Because it will not only affect you, it will affect your entire family dynamic. And for the pebuo, that's where good family relations come in. Dito yata pala nagkagina kung what are the values they should look for in a spouse. That's the simple answer. Sungguha o kante bunbo kardin sa ito lo. That's the single best decision I made in my life. And gunbo, gun pego ya ka. Itay gun pego ka traditional, so italaga ikatin ko ito. Usiwa ka kipagpilit pa. Ikakikha. It's very, very important. So, inabi ko, long zong may pun ba? So, definitely no. Ano sige, pangka.
Thank you for all your questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time.